Hello. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny, and this is a place where I like to talk about all things murdery. So about a week or so ago, I posted my initial thoughts on Netflix's biopic about Jeffrey Dahmer. And today I want to continue our story. Let's go. In September of 2022, Netflix released their hit biopic series of Jeffrey Dahmer, and it has sparked both interest and controversy. So we're going to start by talking about the interest. So for me personally, the TV show Snapped, which is available on the Oxygen Network or streaming on Peacock, was my personal gateway drug to the true crime genre. I was originally fascinated by the idea that the local soccer mom, chair of the PTA, Girl Scout troop leader, or Sunday school teacher suddenly decided it was a good idea to chop her husband up with an axe and bury him in the backyard. It boggles the mind. So as a society, I think we seek to understand how these things happen. So likewise, we feel a need to understand the likes of Jeffrey Dahmer. What led this man to commit the truly horrific acts that he did? How did he get away with them for so long? Aside from Dahmer himself, there's shock about the apparent disregard by the police for his victims and disregarding the concerns from his neighbors. We want to understand. It's the same basic morbid curiosity that causes people to slow down and stare at a violent roadside accident. So where does the controversy come in? So the first big outcry that came with the release of the biopic was the inclusion of the hashtag LGBTQ. I think there can be a temptation to hashtag everything under the sun to try to grab as many viewer groups as possible, but to imply that this is LGBTQ content simply because Dahmer was a gay man doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Fans of the series issued a demand to Netflix to remove the hashtag, and Netflix has complied. Now the only real question to ask is, who thought that was a good idea in the first place? So next up, the second concern, and this is one that comes up every time we talk about serial killers, is the idea that we are continuing to issue celebrity status to people who have committed monstrous acts. Because of our fascination with how these things happen in the first place, it becomes easy to ignore the victims and focus only on the perpetrator. After all, the victims didn't do anything that appears to be unusual to us. They were just out there living their lives. So there doesn't appear to be anything to talk about when it comes to the victims. Which takes us to the third issue. To their families and friends, these people were not just victims of Jeffrey Dahmer. They're people they love. Every time one of these big biopics or news stories comes up again, for them, they just have to keep reliving the pain of losing someone they love in such a horrific manner. It can be easy to discount these victims because many of them were, not all, but many of them were engaging in behavior we deem to be risky. In other words, we blame the victims for putting themselves in these situations in the first place. At the end of the day, though, they were just people. They're just out there trying to get by like the rest of us. And unfortunately, they came across a monster. So, on the heels of their success with the Dahmer biopic, Netflix has also released a 3-part documentary series entitled Conversations with a Killer, the Jeffrey Dahmer Tapes. So this features interviews with Dahmer's lawyer, as well as police detectives, contemporary journalists, and finally, even some friends of the victims. To see Dahmer's world through their eyes and to hear their reflections is truly eye-opening. Wendy Patrick, one of Dahmer's attorneys, is heavily featured in the documentary, and tapes of her interviews with Dahmer are included. Not only do we hear Wendy's interpretation of her time with Dahmer, but we actually hear his descriptions and explanations in his own voice. One of the things that does is it lets us form our own opinions about Dahmer's intentions instead of just hearing those that have been filtered through the media. I will say, do remember, though, that we're still only hearing snippets that they want to share with the documentary and not the whole of the tapes, so a filter is still being applied. Listening to just the snippets that were included in the documentary, I do have to wonder how the police and law enforcement managed to listen to the full detail. Being a documentary on Netflix, you know they cut out the parts that were most gruesome or graphic. Still, Dahmer discusses his fascination with anatomy as a catalyst for his initial dissections and ultimately developing a sexual attraction to viscera. Wendy discusses the crime scene in all its bloody and smelly details. A neighbor talks about watching the police carrying body parts out of the building in small cardboard boxes. Yet people continue to express concern that these documentaries romanticize serial killers. So how does the documentary measure up against the biopic? Well, there are many things that the original Netflix biopic gets right about Dahmer's story. It's valuable to remember, though, that much of what we know about Dahmer's actual killing of his victims is based only on what Dahmer told the police or media. For example, Dahmer killed his first victim, Stephen Hicks, in 1978, and Dahmer wasn't apprehended until 1991. Between that long time span and Dahmer's extreme efforts to destroy the body, there wasn't much left to review forensically. So Dahmer is portrayed as bludgeoning and then strangling Hicks in a fit of rage. But no one will ever really know for certain what happened. The only people that could tell us is Jeffrey Dahmer. So the biopic stays true to Dahmer's portrayal, but that's all it was. One of the things that I was shocked to hear about in the documentary was Dahmer's portrayal of his experience with the mannequin. So Dahmer explained that he had brought home this male mannequin in an attempt to experiment and create a surrogate partner, rather than acting out his immoral homosexual desires with a human male. Dahmer was living with his very religious grandmother at the time, and she was certain the church could cure him of these unnatural feelings. In the biopic, the grandmother discovers the mannequin and throws it out in the garbage. Upon discovering this, Dahmer explodes in a fit of rage, screaming at her and breaking things in the kitchen. In his interview with Wendy in the documentary, he calmly claims that after his grandmother found the mannequin, he thought it was best to get rid of it himself. Now, I don't know which of these stories is true because, again, we have only Dahmer's version to go on here. However, if his account is accurate, why did the biopic feel the need to add drama to that event? Is a biopic about a man who murdered at least 17 victims and then ate some of them not dramatic enough for us? So where does that leave us? There are likely hundreds of documentaries, biopics, biographies, and even fan fiction with Jeffrey Dahmer at the center of the story. These two were particularly well done, and that's why people are responding to them. These shows are not the first and they're of their kind, and they certainly won't be the last. In the last few years, biopics have become increasingly popular, and not just those of serial killers. Think about Bohemian Rhapsody about the band Queen, or Rocket Man about Sir Elton John. These carried high budgets, star power, and proof that these types of biopics, when well done, can be successful. I predict that with the success of this documentary, or this biopic, more of this kind will follow. Stay tuned. Please remember to like and subscribe and leave me a note in the comments. Did you see the biopic? Did you watch the documentary? Both? What'd you think? And as always, until next time, have fun, be safe, and don't murder anyone. Bye.